Prime Minister Mark Carney promised big budget savings in his election platform, promising to find $13 billion in cost reductions over the next 3 years. But with plans to juice defense spending, some economists predict the federal government will need to slash civil service jobs in order to make up the balance.
You'd be getting to cuts in the neighborhood of 24% of operational expenditures. Most of that would be on personnel in those leftover departments. To give you some historical context, the Harper cuts of the early 2010s were 5 to 10%, depending on the department. The Martin cuts of the mid-1990s were 18.9%.
David McDonald of the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives points out the Department of National Defence is already 1/4 of all operational spending and likely to get bigger, not smaller. That means cuts in every other department to make up the balance. In a new report, McDonald writes that the $13 billion in promised savings already exceeds everything the government spends on consultants, IT services, and in other fields, meaning staffing is probably the only place to find those promised savings.
Well, this is always the promise. Big cuts, big savings, lower deficit with no impact on services. But of course, we've seen this movie before. Turns out if you cut back on staffing, it gets very difficult to get a hold of somebody in the federal government when you have a problem with your taxes, when you can't get EI,